Okay, just a video overview of some Photoshop basics, which was a request I had, and so I will just go over some basic considerations for using images in let's say the context of your guidebook or even for online, but just want to give you a sense of looking at file size, considering file types, color modes, some basic image editing. I'm not a big, I don't use a lot of filters, but there are some options there we can check out. Some blending modes I use a lot, and then, making sure your files are saved correctly and all that. So, yeah, I pulled up an image here, which is just, a very basic, little detail shot. This is a wall. It's a phone photo, right? So it's not a well thought out shot. It's just a, snippet of a phone photo from a wall in Ecuador, for example. So this, it's just a good one. It has some color that looks like it could be in need of some tweaking. Okay, so it's just a good example for us to work with. So first thing I'm going to do is when I pull an image, and what you'll notice a lot of times, especially if you're using photos from your phone, is when you go to your image size, you'll see that the size itself is quite large, and the resolution is actually really low. So this is 72 is screen resolution, and since we're printing our books, I typically want to have this in the 300 range. So what I'll do is I'll click on my image size, which is under image size, and then I'll take off this resample, and I'll make this 300. And I'll see that automatically what that does is when I up my resolution, as long as my image is large enough, I can up my resolution and just have the size reduce proportionally. And that's why I have to take off the resample button, because if I leave that on, it's going to size it up, but it's going to keep it the same size, and the image will be pixelated. Okay, so that's what I'll do there if I want to make this 300 dpi. And this is what I need to make sure is, okay, then is this size going to be large enough for the new, is this new size going to work for the context it's going to be put in? For an 8x8 book, it could work, but the crop would be, different if it was in a square environment. So I have to, if I wanted a full bleed photo at least. So I just want to be aware of how size is going to relate to the context and the size of the project I'm working on. Okay, but now I know that image is a high resolution image and could go to print without any quality issues. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do typically is I'll work in RGB mode, even if this is for a print project. When I'm doing any of the image edits, I will keep it in an RGB color mode and do all my edits, and then later convert it at the end to CMYK. And oftentimes what I'll do is I'll save it as a CMYK version, so I have my original file as well. I can always go back and forth between the two. If I make it into CMYK, I can turn it back to RGB. But I just like to, I don't do that with everything because I want to have doubles of everything. But if it's something that I think I might refer back to and need again, I'll typically save it as and convert it to CMYK. Okay. You got, again, the thing you got to be careful about there is just having a bunch of large photos on your computer if they're not going to be used. So I'll work in RGB color, and then the next thing I'll do is I'll go to my adjustment layers. So if any adjustments you make using an adjustment layer, it's great because they're not actually affecting the source image. They're layers that are altering and adjusting the quality of the photo. And the first thing I typically do is I go into my levels, okay? And if you've had a digital photo class, for example, or any primarily digital photo class, then you might have gone into like a Lightroom for your photo processing, or even in Photoshop, the ideas are basically the same. And you'll see your histogram here, and I always, I click this little default thing here. And then I typically like to, and here's where I don't get scientific at all, and you might have a photo professor tell you things differently here, but I just go in and make sure that these are kind of evenly set on the histogram here. I won't necessarily tweak these radically. I'll just set them like this and make sure that they're kind of at the 2 points of the histogram there, and I don't really even honestly mess with the middle one too much. You could do all of this right here in your levels and be fine, but I'll typically leave that alone. And then I'll go from there into my curves, and then I'll just click that there, and then I just really kind of start eyeballing this. I'll click this and drag it down. If I go up, it's going to be lighter. If I go down, it's going to be a little bit darker. okay? And you can set different points on your curves here. You know, if you wanted to have it lighten in certain ways and darken in certain ways, you can do that. I don't get too complex here with my needs, so I kind of just have a little, you know, I kind of keep it pretty basic on the curves. And then the next thing I'll typically do is I'll go into sometimes my color balance, and again, just eyeballs here. So you know, I don't have any set ideas. I'll start with the mid-tones and I'll go, okay, is this image, you can see sometimes there's a cast to an image that maybe there's like a little bit of too much yellow or green or cyan to it or magenta. So you can tweak these if you want to bring out certain colors. So if I go more reddish here, it goes that direction. If I go more cyan here, it goes, you know, you can see it has more of a blue cast to it. And sometimes you don't really have to alter these at all, you know, so you can use your discretion here and get a sense of how you want to treat these. I know I don't want to go more green necessarily, so I might leave these pretty much alone. If I go too yellow though, you know, again, I'm just really eyeballing this and seeing the colors I want to get without having too much of a certain cast on in the image, okay? So I can see how these affect, some of them affect certain colors more than others. Okay, I'm gonna do minimal tweaks here. I'm not gonna really do a lot. It has a slightly yellowish cast and I want to take that out. And so I'll just kind of go through these and I'm really just sliding them around and seeing the effects and deciding what I like and what I don't like. Okay, so after that, you know, I've probably made very minor changes with my color balance. As you can see, when you click that off and on, it's not major there. So that particular image didn't need a lot of it. Another thing I'll do, you can look at an easy one is like using your vibrance slider, and you could, if you want the image to be a little more vibrant, you can take it up or down if you want it less vibrant. And then saturation also, the color, you can saturate the colors a little more. And I'll typically use that, but I don't overdo it. I'll just add a little bit of saturation. And already you can see, okay, if I turn all these off, that's my original image, okay? Which with the phone and whatever late light conditions, you know, was not showing me anything too vibrant. And even just some minor quick tweaks, I have an image that's, you know, at least more punchy and has more pop to it. I would probably go in here more and actually tweak this more than we have to refine it further, but that's just a general approach to consider. Okay, so now you have your adjustment layers all set up. If you were gonna be done with this, then what you would do is you would, probably save it as a file here, and I'm gonna save it on my computer. And if I was going to put it in these shots here, I'm probably going to keep it, if I'm using it for print, I'm going to leave it in a TIFF format. It is a layered file right now. So I typically, before I do save the file, I will flatten it, okay? But I'm only going to flatten it if I know I'm not going to make other changes to it or if I'm happy with the changes I've made. Otherwise, I'm going to save it as, okay? And again, you need to be careful with all these save as's, you know, because you're going to have version control issues. It might get confusing, but you're also going to have unnecessarily, packed folders of images, and file sizes are going to be, they're going to be cumbersome after a while on your computer system. So, you can do that. Sometimes I'll save as and just get everything loaded up, and then I'll go through at the end of a project or when it's, packaged and set, and then I'll delete any files that I'm not going to use again. Or I'll just put them on an external hard drive and take them off the computer. So I do have them if I want. But pretty soon things get cluttery. So a TIFF file is a standard print format. And so I'll use TIFF oftentimes. You could use a high-res JPEG and it could be okay, but there's going to be a little bit of compression on that, so I tend to go for higher quality images. I'll go with a TIFF file. And the way if you did want to flatten this, you would just click on your layers file and flatten that, and now it's just that one background image, and which is fine for our needs here. Okay, so a little bit of file types, file size, and color modes, and basic image editing and adjustment layers. Again, you can adjust your image in this way too. If you go to image mode or image adjustments and adjust them here, you could do that, but then that's going to be actually impacting the image itself. So I use the adjustment layers. In fact, I haven't used this in years. Is it gonna? Let's see what it's going to do. Yeah, so it's going to actually adjust the image without giving me the option to to take that off. So that's why I don't do that. I'll always use the adjustment layers. Okay. Another thing you can do is, let's say you wanted to use this in a certain context, and you only had say a limited color palette, and you didn't really need to worry about all these other colors. In fact, actually, here's another one, another just very basic phone photo, nothing spectacular, but I'll typically go in again, first thing, make sure that the size is good, go in here, make this 300, and now the trick is, this isn't going to work going to 300 if if I go into image size, and let's say this image is 8 or like 4 by 8, for example, and it's 72. I can't go 300 DPI without making that thing micro sized, right? So just making sure that it's not, you can't automatically go in and make this 300. Your source image has to be large enough to handle that, okay? Sometimes if an image is too small, and I know it's going to be printed digitally, I'll go in here and make it, like I said in class, 150-ish. That's about as low as I'd want to go for a print situation. And even then, it might be kind of sketchy, so you got to be careful. In the digital situation, if you're printing to a digital printer, that's probably fine. Especially if you're printing at home, it would probably be fine, say on an inkjet printer. Just be really aware of size. Okay, so this really trips people up a lot. This source image has to be big enough for this to go to 300 and still be a workable size. Okay. And fortunately for us, it is. I'll go through that. Even if I know if I'm going to change this, and let's say I want to make it grayscale. I'm going to go to image mode grayscale. Okay, I'm going to discard the color information, and then I can overlay color. I can make duotone. So there are a couple different ways to handle that. You could go to image mode duotone, and you can automatically get that sort of duotone effect. You can make it a halftone or a monotone, okay, and go in here and select color. Now, one thing, I know a lot of people use the sliders, and for certain situations, I think that's fine. But especially if you want to get a unified color palette, I'm always going to use color values. I'm going to actually assign RGB or CMYK values, probably in this situation RGB values, or you're going to find the hex code. Especially for if you're doing stuff for web, and you're going to find a specific hex code and place that in there, and copy and paste that in, so you know that the color that you're picking from here is consistent. So I'll use the color picker. I'm just experimenting, but I'll typically want to be, and I see students use that a lot. And what happens is you have inconsistent colors, even if they're subtly inconsistent. So you typically want to use your actual either RGB values or hex code, or when you get into the CMYK, maybe in Illustrator, I always use CMYK colors or Pantones. So that's what it would look like as a monotone. And let's say I did want that one color idea. I know, okay, I got to specify an ink name here. Let's call this blue 1, okay? And I know right away, okay, that I lost a lot of contrast, so I'm going to go in here. And now what I notice is if I'm in this mode of grayscale, even though it's a halftone, I'll know that I see that my items. I'm sorry. Well, we're in a duotone format, color mode, but I know that I see that I'm limited here. So what I'll do is, if I know that this is the general direction I want to go, I'll go back into my image mode, and I'll go back to RGB, and then I have all these options again. So I'll go to levels, first thing, and see how I'm going to slide this over here. That's going to darken it up for me a little bit. And I'm trying to get some more of that contrast, but the trick is I'm losing some depth here. So that's a little bit tricky. I'll go into my curves and start exploring there. Do I want to lighten it? Do I want to darken it? And you can see that as I darken it, it'll start to give me a little bit of that depth back. But the trick is, when I'm doing this, what's happening is my color shifting too, okay? So you got to be really aware of, okay, any adjustments you make, even if you've selected a specific color you want, as you start to make adjustments to the image itself, your colors may shift, okay? So that's just a trick to be aware of is okay, are they still going to feel consistent? Because every image is going to have its unique needs based on what the content of the photo is, okay? So use all these with caution. But I could go in here and still mess with vibrance or hue and saturation, color balance. I mean, it's a little trickier when you have a halftone, but you can still see that it does it does help you from a, even just with that single color, things kind of with that, when you throw that red in, that's a certain feel. If we go more blue, it's a certain feel. And you can see the red gives you more visual depth, but the blue might be the direction you want to go in. So you got to use your judgment here. I'm just kind of freestyling it here as we're moving through, because I don't want it to go too red, so I'm going to add a little more. I'm sorry, I don't want to go too yellowish green, so I'm going to add a little more on the magenta here, a little more blue. See, if I go yellow, it starts to get that cast to it. The nice thing is if you start exploring with some of the adjustments, the earlier adjustments, if you go into something like color balance, if it started to shift too far away from where you wanted it, you can go in and adjust and get it back into that zone at least somewhat, which is cool. I'm mainly shooting for depth here in a halftone or monotone context, just so I can not lose, so it doesn't get too flat on me. Okay. So again, this is maybe boring to look at right now, just sliding things around, but it'll give you a sense of kind of just how to work with the parameters and make sure that you're not going too far from the original look and feel you want. You could go, even to these crazy, if you go down into the adjustments, you can see a lot of different examples here. If you like, threshold is one where people will use, they'll use a lot, and the trick is then your photo becomes almost like a photocopy in a way. And now this could be really useful for certain effects, especially like one thing you could do. Let me take that off. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take the threshold off of there. I'm going to delete that layer. One thing that I could do is, so one thing is if you have a background layer and it's locked, just double click on it and make a layer and hit OK. And then one thing I can do is I can copy this layer. If you go under to your, I always just copy it, which is Command J, which would be Control J maybe. Now I have a copy of this. If I wanted to, make a threshold on this adjustment, I can do it this way now. If I wanted to make that radical change here, I can see that, okay, there's my image again. It has a certain effect to it, and maybe that's the look and that's the vibe I want on there. You can see where it is in the order of the other adjustment layers affects it. Okay, so if you go above it or below it, it's either going to be up here. It's not going to be affected by those adjustment layers. Down here it is. Now, one thing you can do is you can take this layer here, and first thing you can do here is you can use a blending mode here, explore your blending modes and see how that starts to work. You can overlay it, you can use different lights, and you'll see that, this is just a total exploration here to see what works for your needs. But you can see this is where you get a very, kind of posterized effect. And sometimes these can be really cool, and sometimes they're not useful at all. So you just have to go through and explore the different blending modes. Okay, and some of them are going to be pretty subtle differences from each other depending on how they're being used. Okay, so let's say you did something. Let's say you did like the lighten deal here. One thing you could do is, now since you have this image on top of here, you could actually either use a blending mode for that one too. So you get a kind of a blend between the background image that's whole and the image on top, which is being more affected by the threshold. You can reduce the opacity of this layer. Okay, and you'll see some subtle tweaks here. It's tricky because the two images are pretty similar. You can adjust the opacity of your threshold even, and that effect will start to minimize a little bit. So you'll see kind of a blend of both of the effects that you have going on. Maybe that's useful, maybe it isn't. Then at a certain point you may not need the second layer. This is just to protect any changes that you do make here. Even though you have adjustment modes, you can sort of combine these two in a way that allows this photo to always be as it was, and this image here, you could, by reducing opacity and everything, you're getting a blend of the image, the two images. It's not really working well for this context here, but essentially what I'll do is oftentimes, let's say I do want to go and I want to make an adjustment to this actual layer, and then I can blend these two layers together. So I get whatever effect is put on here blended with the original file, and so you can kind of have some interesting contrasts of texture and colors and things like that. All right, so I mean, that's just one way to handle, say, a monotone or duotone type of effect. Another thing you could do is you could, let's say you want to, let's say, fill a color on here. For example, let's just put a fill on that layer. I just filled that layer with this red color. So now this original image actually has that color on top of it. And then you could go in and see, so that's just that solid color. Because I've basically gotten rid of that image by flooding it with color, so that image is now gone. And I can, by using that overlay of color, now create a totally different palette on that original image. And again, these are all the effects, impacting this red, which is ultimately overlaid on top of this original image. And I'm just using my opacity here to see, how much of that interaction I want between the, these layers and this layer. I can also use my blending modes again. At a certain point here, you're kind of, overriding certain elements of the original image, but certain blends of the layers can actually, the interaction can be cool. And a lot of it's really kind of a chance, I'll be honest with you, but that's part of the fun, is the exploration of seeing what works and what doesn't. Okay, I mean, even something like these crazy exclusion where the things almost become negative in their look and feel, they can be kind of cool. Even something like this, if you then reduced the opacity even more, you can start to see how it interacts with the layer below. Okay, and sometimes it's not going to work at all, and sometimes it is. Like, this is the kind of stuff that's useful for posters. If you want like a tone on tone or a very subtle image in the background, and you see this almost becomes more textural than photographic at this point, which is cool, can be interesting. Okay, and because we're sort of freestyling here, I mean, I do this kind of thing a lot, where if, for example, if I look at just some it's in here, and I'll take an image like this, for example, which is a pretty on the side of the road snap photo, snap of the desert, which is very uneventful imagery. It's like I love the desert, it's beautiful, but it's very low contrast, it doesn't have a lot of vibrance to it. I can take it and tweak it around and actually through just some basic layer tweaks and adjustments, create a more, almost graphic impact. And then I can, through just random explorations, I'll take that exact same layer, okay, copy it, and then turn it 180 so it sits on top of itself. So now, and I have two different, based on my blending modes and the, the tweaks I've made, I have it in this very graphic, almost, it's less photographic now, almost photocopied. And I've created this sort of abstract landscape just by combining two images, rotating them 180 degrees and impacting their color. And then I can use that as a background. So I have my PSD and my TIFF for the same thing. And then I'll get into just some, some explorations here, where I'll make a TIFF out of that. I've adjusted the color further to a place I like a little bit better. I might do some overlays and just fill layers. And it's, again, very much like I was just showing you, is just totally exploration, total exploration. And then I'll get to some places like, okay, I'll start adding some copy and things like that, put them on a little bit of a background, bring in a little graphic element, combine another photo here. I overlaid a photo. And I used the blending modes in such a way where it only showed up in this little gap between these two photos. And then, did a couple variations of that between, that flat version, and I overlaid a grid element in there as well. So just to, this is all starting with a very bland and very basic snap of that image, okay? So using these blending modes, using these layer effects, adjustments, and things like that, you can create some pretty fun stuff. And so again, if you look at where we are compared to where we started, okay, pretty different place. And that's just through a little bit of calculated tweaks, but also a lot of exploration, all right, when it comes to those blending modes. Um, so last thing I'll say is, so like if we go back up to our original image here, sometimes people will use filters, and you can use, the one that I'll typically use, if I use it at all, is like the color halftone under Pixelate. That can be kind of fun. This is really going to be an exploration where you start to see how it affects, if you want to get that very, kind of old printed look with the halftone, and you see the dots in here, these halftone dots. It looks like very much like an old school, almost poor quality printing effect, which can be fun, especially like I said before, if I combine photos, if I have my original photo under here and I overlay this on top. So for example, if I wanted to, I'll make that into layer by double clicking. Command J or Control J will copy the layer. And for this layer, I want to go ahead and make that effect. And I'll do a color halftone. And you can experiment with the radius too, and see how that works. They get bigger or smaller, the dots. And then you could, if you wanted to, combine the two. Again, just go in and mess with your opacity here, so you can minimize that effect. You can, again, adjust your blending modes and see how that works. You can get this almost old school, old film photo, disposable film camera aesthetic if you wanted to. Just by subtle changes, and interactions of layers, it can be really fun. All right. Just know that any filter effect that you add like that, if you don't undo it, it's going to be done, and you won't be able to undo it at some point. And so I use, again, the filters I use very, very minimally, and sometimes I'll use some sharp and some unsharp mask things to tweak the image and tighten it up and stuff. But I won't really use a lot of these effects and stylized things. That's just I don't. Sometimes you can add noise. It's trying to get a sense of with the halftone, it's not going to be the easiest to see, but you can see like it starts to become very distorted here. You can mess with your threshold, and the nice thing is, as long as you have preview clicked, you can explore and see what's going to work for your image. Now, this is if I want to get a very lo-fi kind of aesthetic happening. This isn't going to be very useful for me, but one thing I could do is then go in and, again, play with my blending modes and see how that starts to interact with the original image. And again, sometimes it doesn't work at all and it totally sucks, and sometimes it'll kind of create some interesting happenstance scenarios. And I've done a lot of different. These get really cheesy. I have to say honestly, like when it starts to look very Photoshop-ish, like this, I avoid all this. But when it's a little more subtle and potentially interesting, like something like this, like that's a little bit. It's still kind of Photoshop-ish. If this was the case, I'd probably go in here and minimize my opacity here and let those images interact a little more and see what happens. Okay, so you can see some of this is calculated knowledge, and some of this is total exploration. All right, so hopefully that at least gives you a few things to consider when working in Photoshop, going from very basic, image size, file types, to some important color mode situations. Now, let's say I have this image where I want it, and I'm going to flatten it now. And I'm going to have this printed, but before I do that, I'll go into here. I have my image done. I'm going to go into my mode. I'm going to make it into CMYK, and I'll hit OK there. And then that's a CMYK image. I'll take that, save it, and use that and bring that into my printed piece. Okay. Or let's say I get this to a certain place, and I'm already in CMYK, but I still want to make a couple tweaks. I can still do that if I want to. I can adjust that a little more, and tweak this a little further. And see, okay, if there are any other little last-minute adjustments that I can make. But just know that when certain color modes will limit your opportunity for editing. Not all the adjustment layers will be available in certain color modes. RGB is the most flexible. Okay, but again, the possibilities are endless. I probably use Photoshop just scratching the surface of its possibilities, of its potential. So just explore and check it out and see what happens. And then any changes you make after the fact, again, you'll want to, if you're not going to need to edit again, you're going to want to flatten the image. And then when you go to save, I'll save it as, and then I'll save it again as a TIFF. I'll name my file accordingly, and then save it. That's just some basic overview of Photoshop. If you have any more questions and you want specific help, let me know. Maybe send it to me via Canvas, and I'll send you specific answers and can make videos to specific questions you may have. All right, thanks.